back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, and I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here and author of Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here we believe that hope is not a sales strategy, and so we come here as often as we can with great sales thought leaders to increase performance of salespeople's pipelines and the results of their teams. Now, in this series, we get to share insights from those that have actually been out there in the field for sometimes decades. Speakers, authors, trainers, and of course, those that have been out there managing sales teams and helping them increase their pipelines as well. My commitment out of every one of these episodes, we build a sales system with our guest that you can use no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals. And that is why it is my pleasure today to introduce someone who's almost on the opposite side of North America from me, pretty close to it, because I'm based here in Tampa, Florida. But I'm going to welcome Selbie to the show. Sir, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Now, Ian, you are on the west coast of North America, Vancouver. Is that right?
Yeah, Vancouver, Canada, just above Seattle, and where forestry and rain are your friends. You don't have an umbrella in Vancouver, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and down here we have gators and a lot of humidity. I think you're in a temperate rainforest, and we are definitely a tropical rainforest. So weather patterns aside, it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. And I'm really excited to get to chat with you because you and I think a lot alike about sales. So I'd love it for people that have never run into you or your brand before. Share with us a little bit about your background, your history in sales, and the work that you're doing today to help companies grow.
Sure. It's a great intro, Sean. I appreciate that. Prior to launching my business, I spent 10 years with Apple Computer, 84 to 94. Some of your viewers weren't born yet, I'm sure, back in those days. I had the distinct honor of meeting Steve Jobs, had my picture taken with him a couple of times. And in 1990, I was Apple's top salesperson in the world, thanks to a couple of large accounts up here in Western Canada. After 10 years at Apple, I decided instead of renting my resume to the highest bidder, I should follow my passion, not just the money. And I started a business dedicating my whole career to helping grow salespeople and sales leaders so they can have predictable results for their careers ongoing. And it's, I look back at 25 years, I think I've been doing this, 17,000 people trained around the world.
Yeah.
I still love what I do. And I think that it's funny that if we pick the right lane, if we get in the right lane, you'll want to do it a long time. And sure, you'll be good at it, but you'll love doing it. And I still love what it is I get to do.
And so out there with all the sales teams that you've been with, what industries do you tend to focus on more than others?
Well, I believe good sales process has nothing to do with an industry. And I'm sure you would agree with me. I've had a lot of experience in the software, high technology, telecommunications, professional services, and even industrial sales, like equipment, or earth moving, or because sales process is sales process. There's a few things we all have in common. We have a value proposition, we have customers with needs and pain, and we have competitors. Right. So those three things are always the same, regardless of the battlefield we find ourselves on.
I love it, dude. Pulling in the language. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that we learned, on battlefield, studying people that were the highest performers in the world, 99 to 100% mission success rate, which would be like a one-call close for every time that you got on the phone with a prospect and you were able to close that sucker. Amazing statistics there. So I would ask what you've seen change as the result of COVID in the world of sales, but I'm going to take a guess that your answer is probably going to be something along the lines of, well, Sean, selling is still the same. We just have to do it maybe in a slightly different way. So I'm going to skip that question, go to a meatier one, if you will. Where do you see salespeople relying on hope a little more than they should in their sales strategy across any part of their sales cycle? Because that's the one I want to dig into with you.
Sure, Sean. And that's a great question. And you're right. Hope isn't a strategy. Hope is hope. It's good to have hope. Yeah. You can't rely on that. I completely agree with you. What I sometimes see, I call them quote goats. And so as you know, I've written a few books and thought leadership papers. One of them is the 7 deadly sins in selling. And sin number 4, I call the premature proposal. And that is, some sales thinking is if I get out there and knock on enough doors and spray and pray with quotes and proposals, someone will buy something, right? And so that's using hope. And so I call them quote goats. If someone wants a proposal, that's wonderful. A good answer might be, that's wonderful. We pride ourselves in developing professional proposals to our clients. However, in order to do an appropriate proposal, we'll need access and some time with you and perhaps others in your organization to better understand your business, your vision, where you're going, what are your challenges. Then and only then are we able to put together an appropriate proposal for your business. So what that's allowing the salesperson to do is qualify before they show their cards. And so many salespeople, it's lazy in a way. They just want to get quotes out there and hope,
well,
spray
some
and pray.
salespeople are measured on number of proposals out the door, right? And that's not a good way to do business. Now, I love that we're diving into tactics already, because we've run across the same challenge, both in my own company and all the companies that we work with. Quote goats. I never heard it expressed that way, but that's a great one. The way that we deal with that is, I'd love to get you a proposal. Let me get the answers to just a few questions to make sure that it's worth our time to produce and that it's worth your time to read. Because if this is just going to get thrown into a junk mail folder, or you're going to save it for 5 years until you might need this, it's really not worth either of our time. Maybe we can check back later on in the year or next year. So definitely, to qualify decision makers, run through all those discovery questions. I love it. Now, something that you and I chatted about with before the show, and that this is something I want to spend some time with you on, because it's probably the number one challenge that we see a lot of sales teams have. Individual salespeople suffer from it, but it really goes systemically across the team. And something that I love asking salespeople, and I'll see if you've ever tried this before. I'm in front of a sales team, and I ask, if I was to ask each of you to map out your sales process on a sheet of paper individually, and then we pulled those sheets of paper together, how many of them would even look remotely the same? Now, have you tried something like that, or what is your version of that? Because I'd love to hear what results you've been seeing.
I love to ask that question before I train them.
Yeah.
One of the things I also do, it's a consulting service. It's a sales and marketing assessment. So I come into a customer, I will interview their management team, get their perspective on things, their value proposition, their process. I'll interview a cross section. I call it, some seniors, some juniors, some people in between of their sales team. And I get them to do exactly that. I'm like a court reporter. I'm typing what they're telling me and trying to put it together. And it's often like spaghetti because there's no rhythm or rhyme. And that's part of the problem. The fun part is I go out and interview their customers. I call that the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some good loyal clients, some challenging ones, and some that got away, some lost, to find out from the customer's perspective what's going on. So the idea of doing a sales process analysis, that's kind of what we're talking about. The before and after is dramatic. One of the biggest things you would know this, that if you can get at least one thing accomplished through training, sure, we want to give them tools and methodology and motivation and the right reward system. If chasing quotes shouldn't be a reward, it should be getting deals. That's a better reward, but certainly getting that established so that you've got a consistent sales process. The betterment, not just for the salesperson. I like looking at different sports as analogies to sales, and I look at golfers. And when golfers, every time they look at a shot, they have a routine they go through. They look at the shot, the hole, how far away, what's the weather, the wind, club selection, a practice swing, and they bring that consistency to their game. Salespeople, we as professionals need also to have that level of professionalism and routine with our game. So that's sales process, right? So instead of the forecast being an art experience, there could be some predictable business science going on.
I'll give you the analogy that we use a lot, because it was my job to study these combat teams, battlefields around the world. And you see the analogy of a team getting ready to clear a house. There are some bad guys in there, and we think that's probably, where they've been hiding for a while. We need to go in there and clear them out. Well, we had to use a consistent process to do that in order to train our people. Because if sometimes we went in through the window, and sometimes we went in through the door, and sometimes we'd rappel on the roof, and nobody knew what was going to happen ahead of time, well, there'd be no way to train these folks how to stay alive in an environment where you have potential booby traps, people with automatic weapons, all kinds of nastiness waiting for them. So I saw these teams go through a tremendous amount of consistent training in their processes. who's supposed to be where in the stack of troops, who's supposed to have what weapon, who's going to be pointing it this way when we get in the house, covering what angles, and that kept them alive. It's what made them essentially bulletproof. So when we talk about consistent processes on sales teams, if we can begin to achieve that, and this is something that I know a lot of sales leaders are really going to care about, how does that begin to help us understand about forecasting and the accuracy of that forecasting if all of my people are, working off the same sheet of music?
That's exactly right. And your analogy to military, to sales, losing your life is far more tragic than losing a deal.
Yes, it is.
So it's great. You know what I mean? You've studied it at the stay alive level, which is far more critical than win a deal and be consistent level. So that's hats off to you. Congratulations. That's amazing. But you're right. I think that there's a real challenge with sales process inaccuracy. And it creates a lot of problems. One is, and you touched on it, forecasting accuracy. The other one is consistency with your value proposition in front of customers and prospects. If everyone's doing it their own way, bringing their style to it, style's fine, but let's be consistent. Then your value proposition is a bit like a ransom note, a little of this, a little of that, different fonts, different colors. What do you guys really do? I've heard from four of you. It doesn't sound like anything the same. So that's one challenge. The other challenge that it makes for in sales leaders, you'll know this, coaching. To be a proactive coach and mentor of anything, you've got to be somewhat expert in it yourself. Again, the sports analogy. If I'm coaching up here in Canada, it would be a hockey team or a football team. If I've never played the game, I'm not going to have any respect of my team, my players. So that's one issue. The other thing is game. It's got to be one game, one process. If I'm trying to coach 10 different salespeople who have 10 at least different sales processes, good luck coaching golf on Tuesday, football Wednesday, bowling on Thursday, and baseball on Friday. Like, who can do that? So picking one process helps the coach be effective. It creates consistency at the customer side of the desk with things like value proposition. And the biggest one you talked about, forecasting accuracy. It's now a predictable science. So someone in Chicago has got a 100K deal, says it's qualified, and someone in San Diego says they've got a $24,000 deal, says it's qualified. Now they both mean the same thing. So now sales management can have some predictability, and that's ultimately how they're measured. Like the VPs of sales are often called the VPs of pressure, right? And so the pressure them. And so accuracy is everything.
And I love the VP of pressure analogy. So if I put that into metalworking and forging, because I've been studying martial artists about as long as I've been studying combat troops, and these martial artists, a lot of them use these beautiful swords that are folded thousands of times, right? So let's use that analogy, VP of pressure. If I'm going after a piece of raw iron and applying pressure to it, it's going to react one way. But if I go after a piece of titanium and apply pressure, that's a different reaction entirely, and it's going to get a different result. Some of my salespeople are titanium, some of them are iron, some of them are stainless steel, some of them might be just made out of soft copper. Who knows? But if we begin to get this process in place, that allows me as a sales leader to be able to understand if you call it a qualified deal, I know it's met at least these baseline requirements for you to call it qualified. And if you haven't met those requirements, we're not calling it qualified. We're calling it something else, deal in process, whatever that might be. So I'd love to hear from you. What are the benefits from a sales VP? So if you're having to sell this idea to a sales VP for one of the projects you're working on, he says, Ian, we'd love to get more forecasting in here, but how is that going to help me as a sales leader? What's your answer to him?
There's huge value in creating consistent sales process across the team for the sales leader. One, and probably the number one that he's measured on, we've touched on, forecasting accuracy will go up, which for sales leaders, that can be job security. If we're reading a fable, a story, like it's a pipeline, not a pipe dream, right? So we've got to put some muscle into it, some predictability into it. And I call qualified. There's 7 things that make a deal qualified. And if you've only got 6 of them, now you know what you're missing, but it doesn't belong in the qualified column of your pipeline. You got to move that back. So it helps with predictability. It also helps with coaching, because you can look at someone's pipeline, and after a while, doing this for as long as I have, I can look at someone's pipeline. I can see what the problems are if they're telling the truth.
Right.
I can just look at the visual map of a pipeline, the shape of it. And if there's some issues with their process, I can see it visually. So as a sales leader, that gives me a map for how to coach them, right? So there's another valuable thing, bringing consistent and effective coaching to the table to your team. Ultimately,
Yep.
you don't want to be 20-80, where 20% of your salespeople are making 80% of your money. You'd rather try and get that more in balance long term. Once you've got an established process, the other great thing that enters into this is recruiting and selection of new talent. Because now you know the game you're playing. So when you're interviewing people, you can ask them, what is their experience with sales process? What has worked for you? What doesn't work for you? So you can right away have some radar on alignment before you even make the selection. Sure, you want to train them and coach them after you hire them as well. But if they're, from a philosophy standpoint, if they're on the same page, you're probably closer to a fit. So it helps you know what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing you mentioned about pipeline, I love being able to start there with most of the folks that I'm working with, because a lot of folks say, yeah, my pipeline's strong. And I say, great, show me where all of your prospects are in the stage of your pipeline. And we quickly discover they don't have a pipeline, they have a funnel. In that I'm trying to put new prospects in each week. I'm running them through some random sequence to get to the bottom. I might convert a couple. Well, that's a funnel, not a pipeline. So when we talk about pipelines at Bulletproof Selling, we talk about defining those pipeline stages by where your prospect is in their sales cycle, which, to your point about forecasting accuracy, is critical. If I have someone in one vertical, I can tell you with pretty good reliability what the conversion rate of that vertical is. And if I've got 7 verticals, it's my job to know what the conversion rate out of each of those verticals is to a closed deal. Even though the ones on the far right, for instance, in a pipeline may be really, really close to becoming customers, the ones on the far left may not. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how you help organizations establish a pipeline to find those stages. And it may be industry dependent, but I'd love to get your idea about how do you use a pipeline to help with forecasting accuracy.
Great question, Sean. I'll use another sport analogy. I think sales is a lot like baseball. There's a lot of stats. And I'm a believer that if you don't measure it, you'll never manage it. So there's data there in the sales process that you can look at. And you don't need a fancy technology for this. Sure, if your CRM can help you, wonderful. And some can, some cannot. CRM also can stand for cash runaway monster. Because you can spend a lot of money and take a lot of runs at trying to make it work. I think they're getting better today. There's lots of systems out there that can play a role for that. But your question is more about having a set of business rules for each phase within the pipeline. Yes. So I have in the pipeline that I've been teaching for all these years, it starts with something called activities, which is not a list of leads. It's something the salesperson has to proactively do to create inflow to their pipeline. So one of them might be an account review. I sit down with an existing account. Who are our very, very best prospects? Well, guess what? Existing customers. Repeat, reference, and referrals. Those 3 sweet R's that are precious to salespeople. So an account review is a good activity. The stats I've been keeping, because I drink my own Kool-Aid, 50% of the time when you do an account review, you will discover a new deal within an account.
Oh, sure.
So an account review is a good activity. Another thing that I facilitate for some of my clients is something called Pipeline Wednesday. So it's 3 hours every Wednesday or every second Wednesday, depending on the situation, where all we're doing is outbound calling, looking for new prospects. With the right script that doesn't sound like a script, calling the right people because we've done our research ahead of time. It's not Wing It Wednesday. It's Pipeline Wednesday. So you better get your stuff done on Tuesday so you're ready for Wednesday. That creates sales muscle as well. So that's good activity. The first stage within the pipeline, I call it interested. And when I'm looking at salespeople, that's not that you're interested. We know you're interested. It's the prospect is interested. What's the evidence? They're giving you time. They will give you a meeting. And one of the challenges with COVID, some people have been, and appropriately not open to face-to-face meetings. So we've been using technologies like this, Sean, like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, whatever it is, to facilitate some FaceTime to do a few things, position our value proposition, understand their business needs. And from there, we move the deal to the next phase that I call discovered. That means I've discovered enough information about an opportunity that, yes, they have a need, they have a budget. Why not give it to me? Now
Right.
who makes the first decision in the sales process? The salesperson. So getting that initial information, that discovered information, helps to decide, and that moves in your pipeline. It moves from interested to now it's discovered. Now there's 7 gates. The most important thing is qualified. I don't think we've all probably seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross.
Oh yeah.
Right? Alex Baldwin was the sales trainer in his New York accent. ABC, AB, always be closing, right?
Yep.
I disagree. I'm all about ABQ, always be qualifying, right? From hello to never goodbye, qualify, qualify, qualify. So once you've said that these 7 criteria are met, it's qualified. And sometimes we'll go from qualified to closed, but there's this other area called selected. This means you are the short list. They're going to go with you. Salespeople caution, this is not time to calculate your commission check. Now it's your to lose. So your competitors know you're winning and they're aiming for you. So there's some strategies we can do in selected to help secure the business, be it a letter of intent. There's other things we can do to get a soft close to get the deal off the street and into our win column. Then there's close. And once we're closed, it's great. And whether you win or lose, we should always learn. When you lose a deal, sure, there's an emotional purge that might have to happen. But the logic needs to go, why did I lose? How can I up my game? How do I get better? Again, if we're not measuring it, we'll never manage it. So let's try and measure why we lost. And we need to measure our win rates within the pipeline all the way through. I call it an interested to close ratio. Some salespeople are 6, 7 to 1. Some salespeople only work on referrals. They're doing something right. And theirs is 2 or 3 to 1. What a close ratio that would be for salespeople. So do great work and ask, follow up to get referrals. You could increase your interested to close ratio dramatically by who you're talking to. Closed is closed, but you're still not done. A quality control check in anyone's pipeline is to, again, with follow-up and account reviews, is to ask the customer for a letter of reference on their letterhead describing the measurable impact your solution has had on their business. Right. And at that point, if they're not going to give you a letter, you're not done yet. Something's not complete with the process. So it's quality control. It lets you see. A lot of salespeople say, well, I haven't heard from them. They must be happy. Well, wait a minute.
Oh, no.
No, we know, right? Like, it's on us to follow up and conduct an account review. And better done face-to-face, but sure, you could use technology to facilitate an account review as well. And so that process, a good process has got a built-in loop. So when you're moving your deal from closed to reference because they're giving you a referral or leads to new boss opportunities or a written letter of reference you can put on your website, use on your social feeds, then what you've done, they're coming back into the interested category. For their next
they circle right back through.
That's right. Yeah. So making sure you've got, I love the term bulletproof, making categories with business rules for each step, so that you can look at it. And again, this gives the sales leader a fabulous coaching map. Now, where should you do your 4-legged sales calls? Well, look at your reps' pipelines, and it'll jump out at you and tell you where.
Yeah, and everything that you mentioned for each of those verticals, because you were dropping little nuggets of, what to do in this vertical and what to do in this vertical. Obviously we could dive into each one of those, but I want to make sure, because we're definitely going to have you back on to talk about those. There's so much there to learn. The overarching idea of a pipeline is something that most salespeople struggle with, or if they have one, they struggle with getting movement through it. So let's start there. Let's build a system for a company or a salesperson to actually just stand up a pipeline of their existing prospects. And a lot of salespeople, again, they may be just working out of this funnel model where, I've got 367 people. I don't know where they are in relation to getting, I don't know what their close ratio is, how close they are to buying. Well, let's start there. So when we talk about building systems here at Bulletproof Selling, we talk about trimming hope away from a sales strategy. And a pipeline is one of the foundational ways to do that because it allows you to forecast what might close in the future. So we use this acronym TRIM because we're trimming hope away. Now, the T in TRIM is a trigger. If I'm a salesperson, What is the triggering mechanism for me to begin standing up a pipeline in my own organization? Is it when I realize I just have a bunch of prospects floating in the ether? Is it when my company has a pipeline but nobody's using it? If you're going into an organization, how do you know it's time to teach them what you just talked about? Here are the verticals of your pipeline.
It's interesting because you're right. It's a bit like spaghetti at the beginning. It's where everyone's kind of doing it their own way based on prior training they may have had, or where they used to work, or what they found has worked. When I first, and this is going back of my Apple days, I used to do trade shows with Apple. We'd have booths and kind of like Convict and those types of things. And I standing up, my feet. If you've ever done a trade show, you're tired. You have to stand for 8 hours. So
yes,
I come home from the trade show. I'd have a stack of business cards, and so this is where I first visually thought, there's got to be a way to lay this out. And on my desk, in fact, I went out to my garage, and with wood, I made a pipeline out of wood that would sit on my desk.
Oh, cool.
And I'd put business cards. These guys are kind of cool. These guys are lukewarm. These guys are pretty warm. These 2 or 3, they're hot. So that's who I'm going to call first, right? So I kind of started like that. I said, well, that's the beginning of something. And when I started the business, it was like, wait a minute, we got to put some meat on the bone here. We can't just say, what am I basing cool to hot from? The way they said, I like your product. That's in my own little etherhead, right? So I have to start looking at, all right. And I've often been told by clients, Ian, you're really hard on what qualified means. Well, because qualified is the most important part of the process. Yeah. So I'd rather win by 3 touchdowns than a last second field goal. So let's not be better at closing. Let's be consistent across the team at qualifying. That is the most important thing. The reason pipelines typically fail is that there's not enough meat on the bone when it comes to qualified. The sales rep goes, no, they like me. I know the guy. I used to play golf with him 10 years ago. He's going to buy qualified. Well, wait a minute. The things that make a deal qualified, it's like going into that house you're talking about with the bad guys inside. Yeah. There better be some real rules to this. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful. And the other beauty about having a pipeline is, and it might be strange at first, anything new. We've all been through sales training. I love to ask this question when I'm teaching. How many of you had sales training before at some point? How many binders do you have on your shelf? 8, 9, 10. When's the last time you opened one? Oh, you never have? That's a very common answer. So
because if you're not using it every day, it's useless information.
That's it. You don't want to be.
I love the idea of this trigger. Then, if we have our prospects and we can't define for ourselves where each of them is in those stages, then it's time to stand up a pipeline or really narrow the lanes of that pipeline. Maybe we have one that's just 3 really wide, interstate lanes. Well, let's shorten these up a bit to clearly define who belongs in each. So if that's our trigger, we don't know where these folks are. Now it's time to stand up a pipeline or to tighten up our existing one. Now the R in trim is to make this thing repeatable. And so you mentioned a couple stages that you recommend every organization has in your pipeline. Without diving into them too much, could you just quickly list them out for us one more time?
Sure, absolutely. So activities is the first stage. That's to do. That's things you're going to do to build. I love what you're saying, Sean. Repeatable pipeline sustainability, right? So there's muscle. It's not I go to the gym once in a while. No, I go to the gym 3 times a week. It's a consistent, right? You've got to be consistent. Then there's interested. That means you're meeting someone in the prospect's organization to do a few things, understand their needs, and position your value. Then you're discovered. That means there's a real deal. There's budget, there's need, you're going to pursue it. Qualified, one of the biggest things that I see salespeople do that are lazy is they fail to get to the decision maker level. Mm-hmm. Talk to influencers. And influencers love free food. They'll wear your swag. They'll go to your ball game with you. But all they can do is say no. They can't say yes. Yeah. So one of the best practices in the qualified section of any pipeline is getting face time with the actual decision maker. Sure. Sometimes that's a team, but a lot of salespeople overlook that, and therefore hope is their only tool. Yeah. So having the repeatable. I love the acronym TRIM. It's fantastic. It really trim away the hope. Build some reliability and repeatability into your process. and measure it. Like have the data, look at where you're going. How do you improve it? Especially
Well,
as a sales
we're
leader.
going to hop in there in just a second. So improve is actually the I in trim, but I think we're missing one or two verticals out of that pipeline. I think we stopped after so please continue there.
So again, activities,
Mhm.
interested, discovered, qualified, not qualifying. So all of the terms in my pipeline are past tense, meaning they're complete. If you've got
Right.
6 of the 7 things in qualified, you're still in discovered, but now you know what
Yeah.
you're missing, right? So, and what you're missing could be access to the decision maker,
Sure.
which is not uncommon, right? After qualified, selected. It's yours to lose, but you don't have a PO yet. Then closed, you can plan the parade and celebrate why you won and have some fun. And then referenced. So
Gotcha.
you've got a letter. They'll give you a lead, a referral. They don't mind being talked to by a prospect. You want to talk to one of my existing clients? They might tell you how we do, right? So you've got the best sales tool in the world. I know there's a lot of CRM, PowerPoint.
Yeah.
There's lots of great tech, but the best sales tool in the world, Sean, is proof. Proof that your value proposition has a measurable impact to a customer's business. Nothing's more believable than that. Right. So
if we have this set up, then this pipeline is established. We have the verticals. Now let's move into improvement. If I need to do something regularly to improve my pipeline, is it taking a quick look across my accounts and making sure that the accounts in each vertical really belong there? What is one thing that I can do, quarterly or monthly to make sure that this pipeline is nice and tight, it's flowing in the right direction? What do you recommend salespeople do there?
Great question. There's a couple of things. First of all, it's getting it established. And it turns out a 2-day, 3-day training program, that's the beginning of the journey. That's not getting it to be, behavior. Turns out you need training and follow-up coaching to make that behavioral change. Human beings, adults, we need 100 days of coaching to make something ours. You're going to the gym, you're trying to lose weight, whatever you're trying to do, pick up a game of golf, you need some repeatability to make it behavior. So the coaching can help that get established. Then you're looking, I call them phases, you call them verticals, the stages in the sales process. Then shape becomes everything. So some salespeople may have a challenge with qualifying their opportunities. A visual shape pipeline will show you that. So that's where diagnostics come in, and you can look at
looking where the clogs in my pipeline are. If I'm really backed up into one vertical or one stage, then I know I need some coaching or some training or some help to move some of those people a little further in.
Absolutely. So the two suspect areas that I tend to run into the most is quantity and quality. So quantity is maybe I look at a pipeline and I don't think you go past a month before refreshing this and re-examining it, maybe getting coached on it, because the meter's running. We sign up for our quota in month 1, and if we do this every quarter, we can't adjust our activity levels to make up for any gaps that get created. So you got to keep it tight for sure. The other quantity is one. So I'm not seeing enough new activity into the pipeline, new leads coming in. Then we've got to do something. We've got to stand up some activity, something like a pipeline Wednesday or some activity level that we're proactively in control of to find new opportunities. The other one's quality, and that's all about the qualification process, right? So those are the two typically suspect areas. And depending, you may have your sales force vertically aligned, which is different than vertical. Might be I'm selling to lawyers, I'm selling to police departments, I'm selling to government. You could have it, and again, great having the data. If you don't measure it, you won't manage it. Your close ratios could vary by segment.
Oh yeah, by sector for sure, and salesperson. Absolutely. If they're targeting different industries with different sales cycles.
Yes, Sean, that's like having an extra lens on your magnifying glass to look into the pipeline and go, okay, this works in our government sales, not so much in our corporate sector, right? So there's things that you have to fine tune. I love that it needs to be ever changing. A pipeline is not written in stone. The process needs to be consistent, but you need to be able to maneuver it for changing times, the needs in the market, a pandemic, competitors. We need to be able to drive the car.
So
not a bus.
Let's dig into the final M in this, which is measurable. So that's the final M in trim. Now let's talk about how to use a pipeline for forecasting accuracy. The biggest way we've found to do this, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is to measure. If I have, let's say I start the month of September with 100 leads in one of those stages inside my pipeline, at the end of September, how many of those have converted to the other stages and how many of those have converted out of those original 100 into clients. And so that'll tell me metrics in two areas. One, how fast and how smooth is my pipeline movement through my stages, and what my final conversion is. So where do you see salespeople needing to do the most measurement, or what's the most benefit to measurement that comes from having a pipeline?
I think bang on. You nailed it really well there, Sean. It's measuring the inflow and how many make it. So I call it not activity, but interested to close ratio. I actually want to know that. The other little filter I put at the beginning is source of lead. I have something called a 10-point score system called lead measurement. So I've got a deal in my pipeline. It's going to get a number aligned to it, 0 to 10. Oh, if it's a 0, it wouldn't get in my pipeline, but typically 6 to 10. And so it's a predictability around what makes the right business for us. Am I talking to the right person? What's their sense of urgency? How loyal are they to other competitors? Every client I've ever had, I build a special Kool-Aid for them on lead measurement because it has to be completely tied to their business model. Sure. So I look at one of the lead measurements that I always look at is source of lead. Where did I get the lead? So if I'm just looking at 100 deals in September, I would want to have, okay, where did I get these leads? Because I get my bottom line guess is, it's not even a guess, it's an experience, that if you start measuring it that way, you're going to find out where the best source of leads come from.
Oh, sure.
Not anyone that hit your website, a bunch of influencers with free time on their hand, trying to look at what you've got on your website. But, where are the leads? Executive referrals from existing clients. Okay. How do I get more of those? I know they convert better. They convert quicker, and I'm spending less time getting no's, more time getting yeses.
Yep. Right? And the things you mentioned about the things that actually define where someone is in a stage, we use those as, you mentioned like your 6 to 10s, they're going to be much higher quality than your 1 to 5s. Well, in the business models that we teach, it's actually, you have 10 things you need to know to be ideally positioned to sell to that customer. Even down to really weird things like what's the color of their dog. I mean, you can make it specific to their industry, but the more you know, the better position you are. And if I have all 10 or 15 of those things, well, that sucker is way down in my pipeline, really close to becoming a closed deal in your terminology. So this is a brilliant system. I think if you have a pipeline and you're not using what Ian has been sharing, begin to apply it. And if you don't have a pipeline at all and you're like, I just don't know where to start, I think these stages are going to be brilliant for you to really begin to get going. And of course, these can be housed. You brought up a really interesting way that I hadn't heard before, low tech. Business cards or sheets of paper on a board. I mean, you could make it that low tech. You could go into an Excel spreadsheet or into a CRM. So lots of different ways to manage that pipeline so you can see it and you can move things around as you discover different things about your prospect that gets them closer to becoming customers. So Ian, brilliant system. I want to wrap up so people can go out there and begin building their pipelines. How do they begin to learn more about you? I know you're active on LinkedIn, but talk to us about your books, your website. Where do we get deeper into your world?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. And it's been a pleasure. I've loved speaking with like-minded individuals like yourself. Turns out there's not a lot of us. So it's a pleasure to know you. And I value this relationship immensely. On closing, I've never lost a deal because I had too much information. I've lost lots because I didn't have enough of the right information. So I think you're bang on with what you said. So my website is salesmentoru.com. So salesmentor, the letter U.com. You can go on there. I've got a podcast, books. I've got online training as well that, if you can't get me live, you could get me recorded. It's another way to distill a pipeline and get things started. And certainly if you want to get a hold of me, reach out to Sean as well. We can collaborate on this and work, hand in glove to help you get your pipeline where it should be, which is sustainable.
Love it, Ian. Thanks so much. Well, for all of those that are out there following Bulletproof Selling, make sure that you're catching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we house all of these live streams. If you want to get a bunch of brilliant insight from people like Ian, they're all housed there virtually, and they're absolutely free. Of course, the podcast that we create out of this is on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere the podcast can be found. For more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty in your pipeline, check out the free resources that are dropping every single day of the week over at bulletproof-selling.com. Well, Sean Rhodes here with Mr. Ian Selbie. Ian, it's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, sir. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. My pleasure.